Hey guys, in this video, I want to share with you this very simple web server project that I created using Python. So I was inspired to do this project because as I was finishing up on the application layer chapter on this book called Computer Networking, a Top-Down Approach, the, the chapter introduced socket programming and basically the concepts of sockets and how a client and server use them to communicate with each other. Also, the web server is actually given as an actual end of chapter project in the book, but as I was reading the instructions for this project, it basically referred to a companion website that will provide the skeleton code for the server. So it basically just wants me to fill in the gaps for missing codes in the server to get it up and running. But as I was looking for the companion website, I couldn't get hold of it. There was no working link, so I figured why not just do this entire web server from scratch myself. So before showing you the actual Python web server, I first want to show and illustrate how a web client and a web server will communicate with each other through their sockets to hopefully give you guys the general mechanism of how everything works here, so that later on when I go through the actual code for the client and the server, you'd have a much better understanding of how each function is used. So first I want to explain what sockets are. So these circles right here are the sockets for the client and the server. So sockets are basically just an IP address and port number pair that a client and server will use in order to have a point-to-point connection with each other. In order to see this more clearly, we can picture a straw, for example, with each hole at the end of the straw being the sockets for the client and the server. So whenever the client wants to communicate with the server, it first must go through this end, go through this hole. So the body of the straw is basically the link or path to where the actual message will travel through, and go out the other end of the straw through this hole to communicate with the server. So now what does the client actually do? Basically all it does is it's the end that makes the requests. So for example, if the server here has this web page called index.html, what the client will do is to create this thing called an HTTP GET request. So an HTTP GET request will look something like this. I just want to quickly mention that in real web browsing, an HTTP GET request is much more complicated and has a lot more things going on compared to here, but for demonstration purposes, let's just focus on this one specific line here. So for the HTTP GET request line, we have the GET keyword in all caps. This is also called the method field. Basically, if a client is requesting something from the server, it needs to use this keyword here, followed by the index.html, which is more formally known as the URL or the Uniform Resource Locator. So it's basically the, in this case, the web page that the server has. And towards the end, we got the HTTP 1.1. This is basically the HTTP protocol version that it is using, though it is not relevant to discuss here. So now let's say the web client wants this web page called index.html from the web server. What it does is it first creates this HTTP GET request message, then it forwards it to its socket. Then from its socket, it forwards it to the web server socket. And finally, the web server receives this HTTP GET request message, and what it does is it locates this index.html URL And this is where it checks if there is an index.html web page available within its system. Once the web server finds this index.html web page within its system, it then replies to the request of the client with an HTTP response message. So this is what an HTTP response message looks like. So the HTTP response message of the server consists of two parts. We have the header here, and we have the content body. So for the header part here, we got 3 lines. The first line is just an indicator for the client that the server successfully found the requested web page. For the second line here, it basically describes the type of content in that web page. In this case, it's a text HTML. And for the third line, it indicates the size of the content body of the web page. So then the web server sends this HTTP response message back to the client in a similar fashion. So it puts it all in its socket first, and from its socket it then sends it back to the web client socket, and from the web client it can finally view the web page by displaying this HTML content via its browser client. So just a quick discussion of HTML. It's basically just a markup language that is used to display textual content on web pages in order for them to have different formattings, different font colors, and so on. So let's say you have this monitor screen. This is your monitor screen, and what happens is if you were to view this on a web page, then let's say this hello from the server enclosed in this H1 thingy. What happens is it will be displayed on the web page as a heading, so it might look something like this: hello from the server, whatever. And let's say you have a text enclosed in like body, then it might look something like this on using a smaller font size. So it's basically just how textual contents are displayed on a web page. So now I will show you guys how the Python web server program works. So first I will execute the server script. As you can see, we are greeted with this very nice ASCII art title, Python web server. Very cool. It then asks me in what mode do I want to run the server in. So I can pick local or global. So if I pick local, then the server will only be able to listen to client requests that are within the same local system. And if I pick global, then it can listen to client requests that are outside the local system. You will get what I mean by this later on, but for now, I will pick local. So let me pick local here. It then asks me for a port number to assign to our server. I will pick 50,000 so that it's within the recommended range as indicated here. Very nice. Then it asks me for a buffer size. Buffer size is basically the receiving rate that we can assign to our server when it is receiving requests from a client. So in our case, 1024 will be enough. As you can see, server set to 1024 and the server is online, and there's a little counter here, active request. Right now, there is currently no client connected to the server, so it's 0. So now that the server script is running and is actively listening for requests, we can now execute the client script. So let me execute the client script here. As you can see, there's 2 modes. There's a CLI mode or a GUI mode. I'll explain why I created 2 modes for the client script later, but for now, I'm going to pick GUI. So as you can see, it opens up this very simple GUI of basically it's like search bar, enter address, enter port, buffer value, and then the URL. So I will start filling this up. So for the address, I will use 127.0.0.1, which is a loopback address, and basically this is the same address in which our server is running on. So now let's assign a port, which is the port that we assign to the server, which is 50,000. And then for a buffer value, this can be different from the server, but let's just pick 1024 as well. And then for the URL, I'll just quickly show you what files the server can serve the clients. So for the URL part here, this is where we can put the content that we want to request from the server. So for example, I have two folders here, HTML pages and images, and inside the images folder, for example, I have a picture of a building and a happy face. And inside the HTML pages folder, I have all this static HTML web page file. So from my client script, these are the contents that I can request. So let's say, for example, I want to request this Python HTML web page file located in this HTML pages folder. Then what I want to do in order for me to request that from the client script is, first I need to know the file path of that HTML page that I want to request within the server. In this case, it's in HTML pages. So Python. So we want to write HTML pages Python. And since it's an HTML file, we add an .html extension. If I can spell Python correctly. And we should be able to view it using our browser once I hit this enter. As you can see, I can now view the Python web page here. So now I will be running the server script in global mode to show you guys how a remote client or a client outside the local system can connect and actually request content from the server. So what I want to do now is to copy the code for the client script in our Windows system. Let's go to client.py. Let's copy this whole thing. And now I'm going to paste it within this Ubuntu virtual machine and run it from here. So now we can go ahead and paste this. Let's create a client script called client.py and paste the code here. So you can see here is the full Python script code for the client. So now let us run the server script again, but this time using the global mode. So I'm going ahead and execute server2.py. I will run it in global mode. G pick 50,000 1024. As you can see, it's online. Now if I execute the client script in this Ubuntu system, we should be able to connect to the server in our Windows OS. So Python 3 client GUI. Nice. So before our server script can start listening to client requests outside the local system, we first need to do something with the Windows Defender firewall. So we can do that by going to inbound rules, clicking on new rule, go to port, next. We specify the port that our server will be using. So in this case, it's 50,000. And then just keep on clicking next, and you can add the name. For example, you can say Python web server demo, something like that. So in this case, here is my created rule, Python Web Server Port 5000. So if we enable this, then our server can finally start listening to client requests outside the local system, which in this case is the Ubuntu virtual machine. So I will execute the server again, and I'm going to run it in global mode, 50,000. So now it's online, and now we can and now let's run the client script in our Ubuntu virtual machine, and we should be able to request contents from the server. Let's run it in GUI mode. So now the server address that we need to put here is going to be the IP address of our Windows system. So if we go to our terminal here and type in ipconfig, now we should be able to know the IP address of our Windows system. And in this case, it's here, the IPv4 address. So now let's plug it in here, and we should be able to request contents from the server. And let's say I want to request images building.jpg, and once I hit search, then we should be able to see it from this Ubuntu virtual machine. As you can see, we got an OK HTTP OK message here, which means that we received the content successfully, and now we can see it from our browser. Now let's try to request another content, let's say an HTML page this time. Let's go to bash.php, bash.html. It's supposed to be B. And as you can see, we've been redirected to the bash web page, and you can also see, and from the server side, you can see how it recorded the client connection as well as the response. The first one is here, and the second one is here.